The world saw Celine Dion as an untouchable queen of ballads. Her soaring voice crashed into the listener like thunder, turning every note into a moment that made the heart fall still. But few knew that behind that radiance was a fragile soul, always longing for a single source of support. When Renée Angelil appeared, she clung to him as if he were the only light in the darkness, turning him into her center, into her entire world. Even when Renée sank into gambling, got entangled in rumors of infidelity, or was dragged into shocking scandals, Céline still stood silently behind him, enduring, protecting, and loving, to the point she forgot her own existence. Everything truly shattered, only when cancer pulled Renée into a battle with no way out. On a January night in 2016, in a silent hospital room, Céline knelt down and held the gradually cooling hand of the man she had depended on her entire life. "Don't go," she whispered, a desperate plea fate refused to answer. When Renée took his final breath, the brilliant light she had built throughout her career abruptly went out, leaving behind a queen standing alone in a kingdom that had just lost its king. The world called it a tragedy, a loss, a shock. But to Céline, it was the moment the entire sky collapsed. Because, from the age of 12, Renée was not only her manager, but the person who saw her, believed in her, and lifted her up before anyone even knew her name. When he left, she didn't just lose a husband. She lost the heartbeat that led her way, the only pillar keeping her standing in the overwhelming glare of fame. Now, while enduring the painful illness of her final years, Céline chooses to begin telling her life story. A story that begins in light, slithers through darkness, and touches truths not everyone dares to look at. That journey, from this moment on, begins. Céline Dion's childhood began in a cramped house, where the laughter of many siblings mingled with the weary sighs of poverty. No cradle, no personal bed, only a small drawer just big enough to fit the body of a newborn. Night after night, she grew up amid the murmuring of more than a dozen siblings, the smell of old clothes, and the heavy breath of days filled with lack. Though her family loved one another, that warmth wasn't enough to cover the smallness and loneliness of a child who always felt she didn't truly belong anywhere. The pain cut deeper at school, where they called her vampire. Skinny, pale, with two protruding front teeth that looked as if they were trying to escape her face. Some days after school, kids blocked her path, spat in her hair, and tore her uniform. Céline ran home, hid in the closet, clutching a pillow as she cried. No one came looking. Her mother was busy cooking for over a dozen mouths. Her father was busy repairing pianos for customers. She learned very early that no matter how loudly you cry, no one is guaranteed to wipe your tears for you. By the age of 9, she was already standing on the table in the family bar, singing until her voice cracked so customers would tip. Some nights, drunk men stuffed money into her collar, stroking her cheek with hands reeking of beer. She stood still, lips pressed tightly together as she kept singing, knowing that if she stopped, her family wouldn't have money to buy bread the next morning. When the lights dimmed, she quietly sat behind the curtains, hugging her knees, silently wondering, will anyone in this world ever sing to me? Just once. As the youngest child, she witnessed all her siblings' storms, overheard sad adult conversations they assumed she didn't understand, and learned to stay silent very early on. That silence became her habit, her defense, as if she was always afraid that one wrong word would hurt someone or make someone leave. Céline's empire includes over 250 million albums sold worldwide. Royalties from timeless classics such as My Heart Will Go On, Because You Loved Me and The Power of Love continue to generate tens of millions of dollars each year. Her two legendary Las Vegas residencies at Caesars Palace from 2003 to 2019 grossed more than $681 million in total, making her the most successful solo residency artist in history. These residencies provided an enormous and steady stream of income, forming the financial backbone of her family. Céline also owned an astonishing portfolio of real estate, including a sprawling Bahamian-style mansion in Jupiter Island, Florida, valued at $72 million since sold, a French-style chateau on a private island in Quebec worth $25.5 million, and luxury penthouse apartments in both Las Vegas and Montreal. From childhood, Céline believed that once she found the man of her life, she would love in a way that made the world stop. She was determined that when she found the one she loved, she would give him everything. Her gentleness, her vulnerability, even the hidden corners she never let anyone touch. And that day came, the fateful day Céline met René Angélil. She simply didn't know that from that moment on, her fate was destined for suffering. People could smirk, whisper that Céline was too dependent, that she lived for him, but she would simply smile softly and shake her head. In those sorrow-streaked eyes, he was not a mere support. He was the sky, the breath, the reason her heart continued beating amid countless heartbreaks. Because the only thing she ever longed for was love. They met on an afternoon that seemed ordinary, yet it accidentally opened a chapter stretching nearly 4 decades. At that time, Céline was only 12, fragile, shy, with wide eyes that always looked ready for the world to hurt her. René, on the other hand, was already halfway through life, carrying with him failures and the last hopes of a man trying to hold on to his career. The audition unfolded in such silence, one could almost hear someone's heart drop. Céline sang as if it were the only way to exist, while René stood frozen, overwhelmed by the purity of her voice, something he thought he would never hear again. At that very moment, a quiet promise stirred within René. He would protect this little girl, open the doors her family only dared to dream of. And Céline, with the innocence of a child raised in poverty and scarcity, looked at him with complete trust, as a father, a guide, someone who could turn a harsh world into a place to lean on. In the years that followed, they lived in the same orbit. René led, protected, guided. Céline trained, strived, broke through. He mortgaged his own house to complete her first album, as if betting his entire future on a little girl who didn't yet understand the meaning of sacrifice. They clung to each other on every trip, in every recording room, on every tiny stage. And slowly, on long nights preparing for performances, through stumbles and recoveries, Céline began feeling something strange. A tender, breath-like tremor that grew clearer each day. At 16, she still didn't understand love, much less dependence. She only knew that when René nodded, she felt safe. When he frowned, her heart clenched as if she had ruined the entire world. She sang to make him proud, worked hard so he'd notice, stumbled because she feared disappointing him. That feeling wasn't romantic love. It was the instinctive clinging of a child who'd never had anything to hold on to, now finding a single star shining in her sky. Over time, that dependence grew deeper, subtler, quieter. On tours, in cold hotel rooms at night, just hearing René's footsteps in the hallway calmed her, as if he were holding the world together beneath her feet. She grew used to his presence, the one who, by simply standing behind her, made everything in her life meaningful. Though unspoken, René was the only person who made her feel no longer small, no longer lost. As she entered adolescence, Céline realized she loved him, with a love both pure and fierce enough to frighten her. She loved René's calmness, the way he patiently watched over every step she took, the warmth beneath his quiet demeanor. But she also knew the distance between them was too wide, too unusual, enough to spark whispers. And yet, whenever she stood before him, all logic dissolved. Her heart chose René long before she understood what love was. The true spark ignited when Céline was around 18 or 19, old enough to recognize her own feelings. During a trip preparing for Eurovision, they sat together in a quiet hotel room. The warm light fell across his face, and Céline realized she no longer looked at him as a teacher, but as the man who made her entire inner world tremble. The night she won the competition, they shared their first kiss, a clumsy, unfamiliar, yet burning kiss neither could ever undo. "I've loved you since the first day I heard you sing," René whispered. Céline cried, tears dripping onto his collar. She knew she had found her true home, but that love was not welcomed. Céline's family, especially her mother, exploded with fear and opposition. A young girl loving a man 26 years older, how could that ever be right? But Céline, with a heart already chosen, simply shook her head through tears. "This is my life." Their love became a silent battle between her heart and the world's judgment, between private longing and public scrutiny. But she did not waver. Her love for René was too strong, too gentle, too real. As her career went international, they chose to keep their love quiet. They hid it for 5 years. On stage, she called him Mr. Angelil. Behind the curtains, she called him Mon Amour. They dated in hotel rooms no one knew about, held hands under dim lights, afraid that even a touch would reveal everything. Her mother, TZ, cried every night, begging her to reconsider. But Céline simply hugged her and whispered, "Mom, I only have him." Céline feared judgment would hurt René, and he feared people would say she loved him out of gratitude or influence. They loved each other in backstage silence, in long days apart, in fleeting glances exchanged before crowds. Every phone call, every little note left on a desk became a thread binding them closer. By 1991, when their love was strong enough to withstand doubt, they got engaged. But Céline didn't announce it immediately. She waited until 1993, when she released the album The Color of My Love, to write in the acknowledgments lines that made the whole world tremble. An admission that she had loved him for so long and could no longer hide it. The world might not have been ready, but her heart had been ready for years. Their 1994 wedding unfolded like a fairy tale. Céline entered Notre Dame in a 7-kilogram crystal gown, wearing a crown, seeing only one person, the man waiting at the end of the aisle. When the priest asked, "Do you agree?" she answered through tears, "Oui, pour toujours." They exchanged rings 3 times, once in Montreal, once in Las Vegas, once in their hearts. But few knew that the first cracks had appeared long before. So small no one noticed, yet enough to spread silently, enough to push an entire life off its intended path. And as those wounds layered upon each other, weaving into an invisible net tightening around her, everything began to fracture in ways no one could repair. The early 2000s carved a cold wound through the lives of Céline Dion and René Angelil, a wound no one could see, yet one that quietly bled. While the Las Vegas lights still blazed and concert halls echoed with a voice that softened the whole world, behind the scenes, a dark storm was forming, slow, relentless. Rumors of wandering footsteps, of dancers and casino staff, of shadowy late-night encounters, Each became an invisible blade slicing at the image of an unshakable marriage. Then, in 2002, the lawsuit struck like lightning, tearing the sky. A woman came forward with her own painful story, accusing Renee of assaulting her in a hotel room in 2000. A lawsuit was filed, statements cold and metallic, yet cutting deeply enough to shake hearts. No one knew what was truth, what was fear, what was despair turned into accusation. Nothing had been proven, yet the mere existence of such a claim was enough to burn through the fragile peace Céline was desperately holding on to. The media circled like a pack of starving wolves. Tabloids plastered sensational headlines. Stories expanded, twisted, mixed with truth and lies. Renee denied everything, calling it fabrication, aimed at his money and reputation. But in the quiet of a dark room, one couldn't help but wonder, could a family truly stay standing after such a storm? Could a woman still sing about love, while her own heart was being wrapped in doubt and pain? Then, the truth emerged in an unexpected direction. The woman and her husband were accused of extortion, then arrested, then convicted. The heavy accusations that once rocked the public were now seen as tools in a scheme. Yet, ironically, even when part of the story was clarified, the pain left behind did not disappear. No court ruling could erase the wound that suspicion had carved. Some rumors claimed that years after the lawsuit and the extortion conviction, their marriage wavered. That at one moment, Céline almost let go under the crushing pressure. Nothing was confirmed. No words were spoken by either of them. Only shadows lingered behind the image of a couple believed to be inseparable. And sometimes, the things left unspoken hurt the most. Because beyond the quiet pain of infidelity, Céline also endured an unhealing wound. The man she loved with her whole heart was entangled in gambling. René Angelil had a deep obsession within himself, a terrifying habit. Every step into a casino was a step into an addiction he could not escape. Every card, every chip added an invisible financial weight onto his shoulders. While people saw the dazzling glow from Céline's performances, they had no idea that behind the curtains were blazing red numbers, silent debts René was trying to hide, carrying alone in silence. Although Céline Dion witnessed this pain, when she saw René return from the casinos with enormous debts, she chose forgiveness. To her, this was a long-standing habit of the man she loved, a part of him she decided to accept. Many sources and books alleged that René once used Céline's shows at Caesar's Palace to pay off his debts. Every residency contract, every show night seemed to be both a success and a hostage to a burden. The casino favored him because he was a high roller, but that favoritism meant the Dion Angelil family had to live in a world that balanced between light and shadow, between applause and silent fear. The truth is that René once lost millions of dollars, but the publicly released figures were only the tip of the iceberg. Media exaggeration made everything worse, pushing the family into the center of public scrutiny. Outsiders only saw gambling losses or his addiction, but few recognized the pressure placed on their marriage, their careers, and the mental health of two people living between glory and anguish. And so, every one of Céline's performances became a battle of survival, singing while silently saving her family from the edge of debt. René, though consumed by gambling, was still the husband, the manager, the man she trusted. Forgiveness and acceptance became an unspoken choice, a quiet triumph over tragedy. But in the silent moments, Céline still wrestled with helplessness, with the pain of watching the man she loved fall deeper into the trap of the red and black tables. For many years, Céline Dion felt trapped in an emotional labyrinth with René at its center. Unable to step outside his embrace, she feared that if she left him, the world would become so empty that no one, nothing, could ever fill that void. And would anyone else ever make her feel such profound love? From the moment Céline met René, at just 12 years old, the bond that formed between them was not merely between an artist and a manager, but between a child seeking safety and a grown man with the power, experience, and influence to shape her future. To Céline, he was not only the one who discovered her talent, but the only person who had seen her worth from the very beginning. That recognition planted the seed of dependence, a root that grew so deep that later, no matter how painful things became, she still could not walk away. The more she grew up, the more Céline realized how vast and harsh the world outside could be. Yet, amid all that chaos, René remained the only steady point. He was the one making decisions for her, protecting her, shielding her from pressure and media. That dependence was silent yet powerful, making it impossible for Céline to break free, even when she was hurt. Deep down, she always believed that if she lost René, her life would collapse, her voice would lose meaning, and her career path would fade into uncertainty. And because he had witnessed every rise and fall, every step of her growth, Céline carried an almost absolute fear of abandonment. She could not imagine a life without him standing behind every spotlight. When rumors arose, when life together grew heavy with pressure, when gambling and emotional burdens made the home atmosphere suffocating, Céline still chose silence. Not because she did not hurt, but because she feared that if she spoke, everything would shatter. Her life had been tied to him for so long that their relationship was no longer mere love. It was like roots wrapped around her heart. Tearing them out would make it bleed. She endured because the fear of loss was greater than the pain of being wounded. That feeling was not only love, it was gratitude. It was the memory of a child once rescued from an unfinished dream. That is why whenever she thought of leaving, Céline felt as though she would be betraying the younger version of herself. The little girl who believed René was the only person in the world who would never turn his back on her. And it was this very belief that bound her tightly into adulthood. Until René's final hours, Céline remained unwavering at his side, tending to every smallest detail of the man to whom she had given her entire life. That love was not just loyalty. It was a great fire burning through the darkness of loss, proving the extraordinary strength of a woman's heart. They say cancer is a disease, but to Céline, it felt like a silent sentence the universe delivered at the exact moment she thought she had everything. She remembered vividly the day the doctors announced René had throat cancer. She froze, as if a gust of cold air had blown through her chest and left a crack that would never heal. René suddenly became so fragile that even a cough made her tremble. From that moment on, the fear of losing him clung to her like a shadow she could not shake off. During the first months of treatment, Céline lived in a state between clarity and haze. Every morning she woke with panic. What if today he grew weaker? What if one evening I return home and no longer hear him call my name? She hid that fear behind her smile, but anyone observant could see her eyes hollowing, as if she had cried beneath the bathroom lights before stepping onto the stage. When René could no longer eat normally, Céline became his hands, his eyes, his breath. She blended his meals, fed him through a tube, wiped beads of sweat from his forehead when pain curled his body. Many nights, when René fell asleep from medication, she sat by the bed, staring at the gaunt face of the man who once seemed so powerful the world had to look up at him, and her tears fell without a sound. The most painful moments were when he tried to speak, but his voice was so faint it felt like a thread about to snap. Every raspy word forced through his scarred throat made her chest tighten. She leaned close, held his hand, whispered, "I'm here. Say it, love." But sometimes, even then, all she could hear was the sound of breath falling like a thin wind, an emptiness that tore her heart apart. When the cancer returned the second time, then the third, Céline felt as though she were falling into a bottomless abyss. She paused her singing career, paused her life outside, retreating into a small world where only she and René existed. She rejected meetings, events, camera flashes, as if fame, success, and glory were meaningless dust if the man lying in that bed would no longer wake up beside her. At night, she did not sleep. She lay listening to his breathing, afraid that if she closed her eyes for even a minute, she would wake to a morning without warmth beside her. Sometimes he would wake and say he was tired, that he was scared. And in those moments, Céline understood that the deepest love is not beautiful promises, but pretending to be strong so the person dying a little more each day can still believe in hope. The day René whispered that he wanted to go in her arms, Céline felt her heart split in two. One half begged God to keep him alive. The other knew he was too exhausted and needed release. She said nothing, just placed her hand on his cheek and kissed his pale forehead, as if trying to hold him back with the last warmth left in her life. In the final months, Céline was a wife, a nurse, and the keeper of the family flame. She tended to him in every detail, changed his medicine, kept his feeding tube from clogging, massaged him when pain tightened his muscles, sang to him when he no longer had strength to open his eyes. They no longer spoke much. They just held hands tightly, as if every squeeze was a plea. Don't go. And then, on the morning of January 14th, 2016, something changed in the silence of the room. No more faint breaths, no more quiet turning. Céline knew instantly, even before she touched him, that her world had changed color. She sat beside her husband's still warm body, laid her head on his shoulder as she had countless times over 3 decades, and for the first time, his shoulder did not lean back into her. From that moment on, their love was no longer a private story, but a lifelong vow proven through an entire existence. When René grew ill, Céline left the spotlight to be by him, just as he had spent decades standing behind her to lift her up. When he weakened, she grew strong. When he trembled, she held his hand tightly. And in every moment, no matter what the world said about dependence or age difference, she simply smiled. Because no one but them knew how deeply their hearts had been tied together. Their love began with music, grew in secrecy, matured through opposition, and survived pain and illness. It was not an easy love, nor a perfect one, but it was the love of two people who saw in each other what the world could not. A place to return to, a sky to breathe under, a heart to love without fear. After René left this world, Céline's life was drawn into a cold emptiness she could not describe. The first mornings without his voice, without the feeling of a shoulder to lean on, made the large house suddenly feel infinite, as if every sound had been swallowed. And then, in that silence, she whispered to herself, "I'm still here, René, but I don't know how to move forward." It wasn't a complaint, but the whisper of a lost soul clinging to the last trace of warmth. But no sooner had her tears dried than her 3 sons called for their mother. Céline had to wipe away every sign of grief and stand up. Even though her body felt drained, She knew that from the moment René closed his eyes, his role had shifted onto her slender shoulders, to be a father, a mother, a pillar. So every day she reminded herself to be strong, not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. They need me, she told herself, and I need to be strong enough for their father's part, too. In the first months after the funeral, she rarely left the house. She spent all her time with her children, eating with them, studying with them, putting them to bed, telling stories, holding them longer, tighter. Every time little Nelson asked, "Where is Daddy?" Céline felt her heart clench, sad, aching, helpless. But she would answer in a voice as gentle as wind, "Daddy is here, in my heart and in yours." She had to be their light, even though she herself was lost in darkness. Just as her spirit had not yet healed, her body betrayed her. Stiff person syndrome struck like a verdict delivered without warning. The muscle spasms, the days she could barely walk, the nights she could not sleep from pain, made her feel as though life was testing her with its cruelest trials. In 2022, Céline stood in front of the camera, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the table edge to keep steady. She spoke, voice breaking bit by bit. The syndrome was imprisoning her body day by day. Sudden seizures, physically agonizing therapy sessions. The times she reached for a familiar high note only to hear it shatter in her throat. She cried, not out of despair, but because she still wanted to sing, still wanted to live, even as her body betrayed her in the harshest way. At times, Céline confessed she felt as if an invisible hand was gripping her throat whenever she tried to sing. And in the dark, she could only cry, whispering, "René, if you were here, you'd know what to do." Someone once asked her softly, "Céline, do you regret it? If you hadn't met certain people, would your life have been less painful?" She fell silent for a moment, then answered with surprising certainty, "Yes, but without those wounds, I could never sing the way I do today." Every scar is a note, every drop of blood, a melody. Pain taught her how to fly on torn wings, and those wings carried her voice through every storm. And perhaps that is the most beautiful thing left after all the loss. The resilience of a heart once shattered, but still capable of planting hope again. Céline wants to tell everyone watching her now that even if you never stand on stage, even if you never hold a microphone, you still have a song inside your heart. Never let anyone steal it. People may doubt you, mock you, try to extinguish your light, but keep singing in any way you can. As long as your song exists, they cannot win. Days pass slowly in sunny Las Vegas. The final rays of sunset touch her small garden, casting a fragile golden hue over hair that has weathered countless sleepless nights. Céline sits there, holding her youngest son, kissing the little head that still smells of sunshine. Her hands still tremble. Her legs sometimes fail her. Her voice is often swept away by invisible spasms. Yet that smile, gentle, calm, says everything. It is not the smile of a diva before a sea of flashes, nor a forced smile to comfort the world. It is the smile of a woman who has walked through hell, suffered wounds carved deep into her heart, lost almost everything, yet still has love and music to hold herself together. If you have stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you for taking the time to feel this journey filled with tears, but also hope. If you wish to continue walking with me, listening to more, living through stories that make the heart tremble, please follow the channel. Every subscription is not just a click, but a small whisper sent to Céline and to those fighting every day. You are not alone.